Hello, everyone. My name is Steven, and I am the Communications Manager for the Laudato Si Action Platform. It is my pleasure to welcome you today on behalf of the platform for our webinar on the next years of Laudato Si, examining climate migration and grassroots change. I see many of you have already done this, but I invite you to introduce yourself in the chat with your name, your country, and your diocese or organization. For those of you who are new to the platform, it is an initiative of the Vatican's Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development, with the Laudato Si movement as its global operational partner. As we gather today, especially in this time of transition following the passing of Pope Francis and the election of Pope Leo XIV, it feels important to recognize the ongoing journey that so many of you are on. Inspired by Laudato Si, Pope Francis's encyclical on care for our common home, many of you have been asking deep questions. How do we live in right relationship with creation? What does ecological responsibility look like in our own lives, in our institutions, and in our communities? That reflection has led families, schools, parishes, religious congregations, hospitals, businesses, and so many others to take concrete steps grounded in faith, justice, and care for the earth and one another. We know that the Laudato Si Action Platform is here simply to accompany you on this journey, and we hope today's webinar is one more tool to help you along the way, one that reminds us we're not alone, and that the next chapter of Laudato Si is already being written in the actions and commitments of people like you. And I know this gathering comes at a meaningful moment. As we mark 10 years since Laudato Si was first released to the world, we're invited to pause, not just to look back, but an invitation to imagine what the next 10 years can look like, what kind of future we are shaping together, starting now with each of you. The call to integral ecology still echoes with urgency, especially as we witness more and more lives uprooted by drought, by disaster, by the invisible lines we call our borders. These movements aren't abstract. They're visible in our streets, in the grief and resilience of those forced to start over. And alongside this are workers, too often unseen, laboring under fragile conditions while holding together the threads of entire communities. In this webinar, we'll hear from people who are working on the front lines of climate displacement, fair labor, and locally rooted responses to ecological breakdown. As Sister Smerilli, Undersecretary for the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development, reminds us, the peripheries are not just places to be observed. They must shape how the Church listens, responds, and walks forward. This is a space for that kind of listening, for conversation, not conclusions, for shared courage, not easy answers. Now, a few announcements before we begin. If you need translation, we are offering translation in Spanish, Italian, French, or Portuguese. You can access them through the Interpretations button at the bottom of your screen. Click the Interpretations button and then choose your language. Next, this webinar is being recorded and live streamed to YouTube. You will be able to watch the recording on our Laudato Si Action Platform YouTube channel, where you'll see the slides and speaker information. Finally, to help us build a sense of community during this time together, we invite you to keep your comments in the chat positive and respectful. If you'd like to revisit our netiquette guidelines, which you agreed to when registering, you'll find the link in the chat. Thank you for helping me make this space one of care and connection. If you have any questions during the webinar, please submit them by clicking the Q&A button at any time. Any questions put in the regular chat may get lost, so please use the Q&A button and we'll answer as many as we can. During today's session, we'll begin with a brief video message from Sister Smerilli. We'll have a few updates from us, from the platform team. And finally, we'll move to the heart of the event, 2 short presentations offering powerful reflection on how communities are responding today to the most ecological and social challenges that are urgent for us. So, as we begin, we're honored to share a message from Sister Sister Smerilli, who serves as the Secretary for the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development. She is an economist and religious sister who works to bridge faith, economy, and global cooperation. She brings a wealth of academic and practical experience, having served as a professor, researcher, Vatican State Counselor, and a key leader in the Church's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Her research focuses on cooperation, ethics, and value-based organizations, themes deeply aligned with the spirit of Laudato Si.
2025 is the year of hope, the global Jubilee year, celebrated by the Catholic Church and other people of faith and goodwill around the world, as well as the 10th anniversary of Pope Francis' encyclical Laudato Si and 800th anniversary of St. Francis' Canticle of the Creatures. As we enter this year, we reflect on the dignity of all persons and respect for God's gift creation, which the Holy Father encouraged us to promote in his letter introducing the Jubilee year, Spe non confundit, which means may hope fill your heart, recognizing the link between respect for human life and dignity, from conception to natural death, and respect for God's gift of creation is at the heart of integral ecology. In the light of this teaching by Pope Francis, the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development acknowledges the precious resource represented by the Laudato Si Action Platform to assist Catholic-inspired and other institutions, as well as families and individuals, in their effort and initiatives to take determinative and definitive action on the promotion of integral ecology. We are grateful for all who have enrolled in the platform. This is a strong sign of your deep respect for the human person and God's creation. We also encourage local churches, episcopal conferences, dioceses, and parishes, as well as religious orders and Catholic-inspired organizations and the ecclesial movement and other people of faith and goodwill to consider enrolling in the platform as a sign of your commitment to the principle, values, teaching, and practice of integral ecology during this Jubilee year and long into the future.
Now, I'd like to introduce Alonso, who serves as the program manager for the Laudato Si Action Platform. He plays a key role in coordinating the global development of the platform, bringing together partners, strategic direction, and supporting the many communities and institutions that are putting Laudato Si into action around the world. With a decade devoted to sustainability and climate change advocacy, his expertise bridges energy, sustainability, and spirituality. As a PhD candidate in management, his interdisciplinary approach fosters meaningful change. Committed to the Catholic Church's sustainable future, Alonso is a catalyst for positive transformation. Alonso, we're grateful for your leadership and for the spirit of care and collaboration you bring to this work. Alonso, over to you.
Thank you, Stephen. And welcome everyone, dear friends of the platform. We're living a decisive moment, a moment that calls not for spectators, but for guardians of creation. The Laudato Si Action Platform is more than just a tool or a program. It is a living response to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. It is an invitation to ecological conversion, a deep a deep transformation of how we live, how we relate to others, and how we care for our common home. Integral ecology teaches that everything is interconnected. Our economy, our lifestyles, our spiritual lives, and the well-being of future generations. Ecological conversion, then, is not optional. It is a moral and spiritual imperative. And it starts with action, however small, however simple. A switch to renewable energy, a shared meal to reduce food waste, a change in banking practices, a prayer for creation, anything. Each action rooted in love and justice become a seed of hope. And today, as we listen to powerful testimonies about climate-related migration, for displacement, and the pursuit of justice across borders, let us remember that the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor often meet in the lives of migrants and refugees. Integral ecology called us to reflect on the human faces behind environmental collapse. Families uprooted by droughts, floods, or extractive industries. As you discern your community's action, consider how you might stand in solidarity with those on the move, who reveal to us both the fragility and the resilience of our shared humanity. Participating in the Laudato Si action platform is not about perfection. It's about commitment. It's about journeying together, aligning our values with our daily decisions, and it's about recognizing the sin of ecological indifference and choosing instead the path of care and responsibility. So I invite you to continue exploring the platform, the suggested actions, upload your Laudato Si plans, find one thing, just one, that your community can start to improve. Upload it, share it, and inspire others. Because in this global movement, no action, and I repeat, is too small, and no heart is too insignificant to make a difference. Together, we are not just implementing a program, we are building a new future. Thank you.
Thank you, Alonso. And as Alonso invites each of you to explore the platform, I do want to share some exciting updates that, at their heart, are designed with each of you in mind. We know that living the call for Laudato Si can sometimes feel overwhelming, especially in the face of so much ecological and social inaction. And yet, the desire to do something is alive and well in this community. So that's why these updates are all about making action more personal and more practical, and ultimately, I hope, more hopeful. One of the biggest changes in our redesigned website now includes a more intuitive dashboard and clearer ways to track your progress over time. It also features personalized suggested actions. So instead of asking, where do I even start? You'll be able to see clear, concrete steps that match your goals and your contexts. This isn't just a checklist. We want to offer this to you as a tool to help you move from reflection to action. We've also launched a new certificate program for institutions, which allow programs like parishes, schools, and dioceses to be formally recognized for your participation. It's a simple way to mark your commitment and inspire others along the way. We know how much work and love goes into these efforts, and this certificate is just one small way of saying thank you for being a part of that journey. All of these updates are here to support you, whether you're just starting out or already deep in the work. This platform is a Vatican-sponsored initiative, yet it is each of you who are the church, living, discerning, and acting with care for our common home. And we're grateful to walk along inside you. Now, I'm very happy to introduce our two speakers. First, we'll hear from Paolo Foglizzo, speaking from Milan, where he is an editor at the Jesuit journal and think tank Aggiornamenti Sociali. Paolo has been working for exploring the relationship between work, dignity, and justice for years. not just through theory, but by helping shape real dialogue in the Church, including contributing as an expert to the Synod of Synodality. His work reminds us that labor isn't just economic, it's relational, spiritual, and essential to any vision of integral ecology. And I think his perspective will be speaking to many of us as we wrestle with questions of purpose and equity in the world we're building. After that, we'll hear from Héctor Poveda. Joining us from Almeria, Spain, Héctor works with the International Catholic Migration Commission, where he helps amplify civil society's voice in global conversations about migration and displacement. What makes his work so compelling, though, is the lens he brings. He looks at how climate change and environmental loss are reshaping lives, especially in indigenous communities across Latin America and the Pacific. His recent research dives into non-economic losses experienced by climate-displaced communities, things like identity, belonging, and memory. These are hard to measure, but deeply felt, and I'm really looking to hear from you, Héctor. So for our first presentation, we will honor your voice, Paolo, and open the floor to you.
Thank you, Stephen. I hope you can hear me well.
Perfectly, thank you.
Okay. And good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, everyone. And it seems right to begin by acknowledging that the content of this presentation is my work, and work for a long time, as Stephen was saying, but is also the result of a process of collective reflection, research, and action, namely the project The Future of Work, Labor After Laudato Si, which began in 2016, less than a year after the publication of the encyclical. And Monsignor Bob Vitillo has been involved since the very beginning, together with myself and many other friends. So the initial insight of this project was that Laudato Si proposes a different way of looking at reality based on the awareness that everything is connected. We therefore started inquiring how this different perspective changes the way we consider work and labor. In this sense, we can consider our initiative as an attempt at an ecological conversion of the notion of work. That is, an attempt to put Laudato Si into practice into a specific domain. The method we followed was also a way of practicing Laudato Si and its multifaceted approach. Laudato Si states that complex problems need to be considered with a variety of approaches and from a variety of points of view. Thus, the project brought together a range of actors that were diverse in terms of both their geographical location, from all the continents, and their type of activity and institutional form. The project was brought on by workers and employers associations, university departments, social research and action centers, NGOs, people involved and working in international organizations, and so on. Together, we took awareness that our world is undergoing multiple crises, or rather, as the encyclical would say, a single multidimensional crisis. Addressing this crisis requires a series of transformation or conversions in the jargon of the encyclical. Our analysis led us to focus on the fact that work is at the heart of both the crisis and the transformations that can lead to solution. On the one hand, the world of work is affected by the consequences of crisis and transformations. On the other hand, it is an indispensable agent of change. There can be no transformation without work. The definition of work found in Laudato Si, in number 125, helped us to focus on this. And this definition says that work is any activity involving a modification of existing reality. Exactly, thank you for sharing the screen. The essence of work is to be a transformative force. Work changes reality. And this is particularly clear in the case of the ecological crisis. It is the agricultural worker, especially the most marginalized. Sorry, there's a problem. Okay. The essence of work is to be an ecological crisis. So this is clear in the case of the ecological crisis, because it is the agricultural workers, especially. So it is the agricultural workers to suffer the consequences of climate change, as it is the workers in energy-intensive industries who suffer the consequences of the ecological transition, which is the appropriate response to. Sorry, there's a problem in my notes, as you may have understood. What I meant is that work is a force of transformation, but on the one hand, the world of work is affected by consequences of crisis and transformation. This is the thing that is very clear in the case of ecological crisis, because, for example, it is agricultural workers, especially the most marginalized, who suffer the consequences of climate change, just as it is workers in energy-intensive industries who suffer the consequences of the ecological transition, which is, by the way, the appropriate reply to climate change. At the same time, and this is where we can see work as an agent of transformation, ecological degradation is a consequence of human work, simply because polluting industries require work. And so does the ecological transition. There will be no ecological transition without a lot of human work. So the relationship between labor and ecological conversion is at stake on both sides, on both fronts. Let's start with jobs that are at risk. If integral ecology is a paradigm of justice, then it is clear that the ecological transition requires taking responsibility for the fate of those workers whose jobs are destined to disappear. For example, the workers employed in the fossil fuel industry. They cannot be left behind, because this would be a concession to the throwaway culture that is exactly the opposite of the ecological conversion. Workers, and especially poor and marginal workers, cannot be made to pay the price of the ecological transition. So, as a consequence, as our societies undergo ecological transition, these workers must be accompanied in an employment transition. This is a requirement of social justice, but it is also a requirement of consistency with the integral ecology approach, which requires us to listen simultaneously to the cry of the earth and to the cry of the poor, and to find solutions that address both. This is what the encyclical states in paragraph 49, as you can see on the screen. This approach, I want to note and to underline, is a radical challenge to another widespread approach that presents work and the environment as enemies, an approach that wants to persuade us that we must choose one or the other. We can stand on the environment side, or we can stand on the workers' side, not on both. But this is a deception, because the earth and the poor are a victim of the same dynamic of injustice. Instead, ecological conversion urges us to believe that is it possible to protect both. Not only possible, it is our duty, and so we need to seek the ways of doing so. Ecological conversion and the dignity of workers are on the same side. This awareness is at the heart of what Laudato Si says in number 139. If you can change, please, the slide. Great. So we need an integrated approach to combating poverty, restoring the dignity to the excluded, and protecting nature. These things at the same time. On the side of work as an agent of transition, as an agent of change, ecological conversion urges us to broaden our notion of work. The foundation is still in number 125 of Laudato Si. So we find again the same number we had before, if you can change the slide. Work is a relationship with oneself, with others, and with the world. Firstly, work is an opportunity for self-realization and personal growth, and has a strong spiritual meaning too, so relationship with oneself. Secondly, work is a place where we meet other people, those we work with and those we work for, those who will benefit from the fruits of our labor. Work, therefore, is a social meaning and builds networks that are expanding globally. Today, as human beings, we are united first and foremost by a network of work. Finally, work has an ecological meaning. It is through work that men and women come into contact with nature, with the environment, modify it, draw resources, and unfortunately, threatens the environment. If we do not understand work as a relationship, we will not be able to make it an instrument of human development, but it will remain our enemy. We will continue to feel slaves to work. With an important consequence, as we all know, without care, any relationship quickly becomes toxic. This is why work must incorporate the dimension of care. It is what Pope Francis proposed in a video message to the International Labour Conference in June 2021. Unfortunately, I put on the Italian version instead of the English. Apologies for these. But you can find the English text on the internet. So what it says in English, it says, if work is a relationship, then it must include the dimension of care, because no relationship can survive without care. Here we are not referring only to care work. Care goes farther. It must be a dimension of all work. Work that does not care, that destroys creation, that endangers the survival of future generations, does not respect the dignity of workers, and cannot be considered dignified. On the contrary, work that cares contributes to the restoration of full human dignity and will help ensure a sustainable future for future generations. Here too, we are faced with a cultural revolution. We have always been used to thinking, to hearing, that work is within the domain of exploitation. Exploitation of workers, exploitation of the environment. So ecological conversion means instead changing our notion of work and conceiving work as an instrument of care, placing work within the paradigm of care instead of the paradigm of exploitation. And this, finally, leads us to broaden our definition of decent work beyond current internationally defined standards, which must remain a cornerstone and indeed continue to progress. Only work through which people receive care and at the same time provide care for other people and for the environment can be deemed as dignified. If this is not the case, if work cannot provide care for people and the environment, then it cannot be deemed dignified, even if all the conditions in terms of pay, working hours, safety, and trade union freedom are formally respected. So, taking ecological conversion seriously leads us to discover a new area of commitment to a more integral respect for the dignity of workers. And indeed, something that our project discovered is that there are experiences, especially in the domain of social and solidarity economy, in which there are enterprises, mainly small enterprises, local businesses, who target expressly both care of creation and care of labor. They try to build and to survive and even to thrift as businesses by putting together these things. This is a great testimony that we discovered through our project. Thank you.
Thank you, Paolo, for those insights and for uplifting the dignity of workers. It is an insightful reflection and a reminder that the future of work must be reimagined in service of dignity and ecological justice. So thank you for grounding our economies in care for people and for the planet. As we continue, we turn to another essential thread, as we mentioned earlier, the lived realities of those most impacted by climate change and displacement. Hector, we're honored to hear your perspective.
Thank you so much, Steven, and thank you so much, Paolo, for sharing your insights, and to all the team, the interpreters, and everybody who has made this important and crucial event a reality. Thank you so much for the introduction. As mentioned, my name is Héctor Poveda, and I work with the International Catholic Migration Commission, ICMC. For those who don't know or might be new to the space, ICMC convenes a global network of national conference of Catholic bishops around the world. It protects and serves uprooted people, including migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, internally displaced persons, and victims of human trafficking, regardless of faith, race, ethnicity, or nationality. Since 2011, ICMC has also played a central role in global migration advocacy by facilitating civil society participation and engagement through the Civil Society Action Committee and the GFMD Civil Society Mechanism. In addition, ICMC also hosts the Future of Work Labor After Laudato Si global project. Before diving into the specific challenges of climate displacement, it is important to clarify the language we use. At ICMC, our work has taught us that how we describe movement matters. The terms we choose don't just reflect realities, but they also shape them. They influence legal frameworks, political and public narratives, and the kinds of protections that people on the move can access. So before we talk about the climate crisis and forced migration, I would like to take a moment to define what we mean by migration, displacement, and even immobility. So to get us started, migration refers to the movement of people within or across borders that involves an element of choice. And this is very important. The migration movements have a level of agency. Displacement, on the other hand, relates to the forced movement of people within or across borders, often due to different factors. May this be conflict, environmental degradation, or other crises or drivers. And immobility It refers when communities are unable or unwilling to leave their lands, the places of residence, despite any threats. This is often seen among indigenous and local communities all throughout the world. So when referring to movement driven by the climate crisis, we use terms like climate-induced displacement rather than climate migration, and the distinction is quite important. In most cases, people are not moving out of choice, but because their environments have become uninhabitable. Recognizing this lack of voluntariness, it matters a lot, not just for the semantics and for the sake of any conversation, but in terms of rights, protections, and visibility in legal and policy frameworks. So I'd like to share with you a short presentation is just one slide with the following numbers. So according to the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, in 2024, there were 9.8 million internally displaced people as a result of disasters across 94 countries. In the same year, there were 45.8 forced movements of people within the borders of the countries due to disasters in over 150 countries. 45.8 million. This number includes people that have had to move once, twice, 3 times. And it's important to keep this in mind because as we will be discussing, climate change doesn't work in a vacuum and often would lead to cycles of displacement, disaster displacement that will lead to people having to be displaced multiple times over the course of their life. Sorry, I thought that I had shared the screen. I believe I did. Yeah. So beyond numbers, understanding the definitions of migration, displacement, and mobility is just the first step. It is important to also look at the context, the contextualization, the localization of these numbers. Behind every number, every digit, there is a soul, there is a person. So if we say climate displacement is after force, then we also need to look at why it happens. People don't just move because of a storm or a drought. What happens around those events makes the movement necessary. Things like where people live, what support they have, and what vulnerabilities are already present. So what are the key factors that influence these climate-induced displacements? In the first, we have the exposure. It refers to how people, infrastructure, housing are physically located in areas that might be prone to a hazard, like a flood, a drought, or storm even. But exposure alone doesn't determine the impact that will have on the community. This impact depends on their vulnerability, which is the second factor. This refers to a person's or community's susceptibility to harm when a hazard occurs. It can be shaped by many things like income level, access to services, housing conditions, or social exclusion. But this vulnerability is not fixed. It can shift depending on the severity of the hazard and who is affected. It works as a sliding scale. The third of these components becomes capacity, which is the ability of a community to respond to and recover from a disaster. A strong capacity can reduce the need for people to move. Weak capacity can push them out. So these 3 components merge into a intersectionality. What I said not long ago, climate impacts don't happen in isolation. They intersect with long-standing economic, social, and political inequalities. That's why when we see climate displacement hitting certain communities harder, especially those already pushed to the margins, it doesn't affect everybody equally. It is important here to emphasize that displacement is often involuntary. I mean, it's driven by environmental degradation, yes, but also by pre-existing vulnerabilities. None of these vulnerabilities are the fault of communities themselves. History has a big part in this, but perhaps that could be a conversation for a different time. When looking at displacement and considering the vulnerability, the exposure, and the capacity, we understand that these movements can lead to vicious cycles disaster, displacement, disaster, which then put people at risk of violations of the human rights, of their dignity. So looking through the work that we've done, we've been able to identify across the large plethora of gaps that are present in this space. We're able to find three issues that we would like to bring to the conversation. The first is that refugee and asylum systems are not responsive to climate change or environmental disaster considerations. For example, the 1951 Convention, Article 1, does not include environmental disasters as valid claims for refugee status. The second is that there is a lack of policies that address the localized needs for displaced people. For example, using temporary labor programs as a solution to climate adaptation, or overlooking the right to stay and solutions for adaptation in place. And also, we find the continued false or oversimplified perceptions of climate displacement affected of people that are affected by climate change. There's a lack of recognition of the different forms of climate-driven displacement, people compared to move due to loss of their livelihoods or other impacts that is still considered voluntary, even though in this context, agency is very limited. So to start wrapping up, we start thinking about international responses and advocacy. How can communities become more resilient to climate displacements? So the first thing that comes to mind is that we must move beyond short-term emergency responses and invest in anticipatory community-led solutions. This includes supporting local and indigenous knowledge systems, ensuring the right to adapt in place, and enabling communities to plan for relocation when necessary on their own terms. International support must also be long-term, flexible, and accessible, shifting power to the communities who bear the brunt of the climate disruption. But resilience is not just simply technical, it's moral. As Pope Francis reminds us, the ecological transition must be just, and this means rethinking how climate finance flows. We must provide climate financing instruments that prioritize equity, reparations for loss and damage, and local adaptation funds accessible to grassroots and migrant-led organizations. Without true and meaningful redistribution, resilience remains out of reach for those that are most at risk. And to conclude, the legal and labor systems must catch up with the realities of climate-induced displacements. This means expanding pathways for regular migration, ensuring safe working conditions for migrant workers impacted by environmental shocks, and integrating climate risks into asylum systems. It also requires a decisive shift in public discourse from narratives of fear and burden to narratives of contribution, care, and shared responsibility. Thank you so much, and Stephen, back to you.
Thank you so much, Hector, for your insights. I see a lot of people resonated in the chat and sharing experiences of witness to migration in their own countries and across borders as well. At this time, we would want to transition to some questions and answers from our audience, Hector. If you're available to answer a few, we would be deeply grateful. And on behalf of Paolo, he had to be excused for another event, so we will send your questions his way and hopefully gain some clarity through conversation beyond the event. So Hector, I'm seeing some questions, including one that is noting, we have challenges in governments in the West in particular for receiving migrants, and there's a search for guidance on how to speak to that reality. Do you have any insights or guidance there when we're coming from these countries that are trying to receive migrants and seeing politics that are not aligned with the principles that you just named?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Stephen. And thank you to the person who asked this question. Is very, very relevant, especially in the context. When it comes to climate migration, and perhaps it would be a great way to start there. When it comes to climate migration, we find that or displacement, I'm sorry, we find that many people are displaced within the constraints of their own country and the proximity where they live. When we talk about narratives and when we talk about the public discourse, we find that there is often the misconception that people are being displaced in large quantities across borders because of climate change. What we find is the alternative, that in reality, people are being displaced internally within their countries, looking for safety. To put an example, a very concrete example in place, Fiji. Fiji has been heavily impacted by climate change, as well as many of the other indigenous communities and countries in the Pacific Islands. Countries that, as the sea levels increase, their shores are receding, and eventually many of these countries will disappear, unfortunately. So in the Pacific, we find that there is indeed cross-border movement and displacement as a result of climate change. But when we extrapolate that to the other parts of the world, that happens internally. It's often internally, not to say that it doesn't happen across border, but it's not in the great quantities that oftentimes we hear in the news or in the different narratives. When considering now the issues and the problems that migrants are facing and displaced people are facing across the world, the case of the United States comes to mind, because I remember a few years ago, the narratives that were surrounding regarding climate-induced displacements, the narratives that the country, many people that are anti-migration were spreading. It was hinting at the idea of fear, at the idea that people are being displaced in large quantities across borders, and that eventually everything will collapse. And yes, there is no doubt that people are migrating, that people are being displaced, but the way that we understand this displacement and the way that we understand the narrative shifts. Is important to have this paradigm shift. And that's why I started the intervention today with some definitions, because the way that we define and the way that we engage with politicians, with different decision-making processes, the language that we use, how we relate, that we go beyond numbers, that we go and see the person, the soul, that every human being is respected for dignity, that has rights just for being human. It really changes the approach that we can take, and what we as the member of society can contribute. So I hope that had addressed at least sections of the other questions, Steven.
Well, you mentioned this is a way to get involved with the decision-making of policymakers and politicians, but now we're also seeing questions about how to engage with our bishops, for example, or our congregations to do concrete work. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to that on behalf of our audience.
Absolutely, that is great. Faith-based and faith-inspired organizations and work, and the different bishops, that's dioceses and networks and faith-based networks, play a very important role. And I'm thinking, for example, I'm from Colombia, and I'm thinking about the different faith-based organizations, as well as the different groups that are working in my home country, working for the favor and the benefit of migrants. There's something beautiful about the work that we do, and the space where we find where we are currently, all of us involved, that there is love for dignity and the person next to you. And that is something very, very important when it comes to working with migrants for the benefit of migrants. So partnering with faith-based organizations, faith-inspired work, is going to prove a big resource and a big way to have a pushback to these narratives that are against migration, to the narratives that criminalize people for looking at their life. We find ourselves that coming together to build solidarity, to engage in processes of collectivization will be priceless, because something that the more that I am involved in this work, the more that I find it inspiring, is the intersectionality that we find in this space. For instance, through ICMC, we help people regardless of the faith, the race, the country, just because of the value of a human dignity, the value of who they are, that everybody deserves to be safe, everybody deserves to be calm, respected, feel, and be in a safe environment. So the Catholic-inspired organizations and faith-based organizations will prove a key ally to counteract these negative narratives and to provide the extra support that migrants stop receiving due to the different changes of politics and different perspectives that are taking us in the way that are taking us to a place that we hope we weren't going to. I hope that that made any sense. Thank you, Steven.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you highlighting the role of many churches and faith-based actors in changing the story, and that we have something to offer to this conversation. And you certainly resonated with many of our audience here today, whether they're coming from Paraguay or Italy or even Los Angeles. I know these are questions that are alive and necessary. So thank you, Hector. And again, on behalf of Paolo, who had to say his goodbye a little bit early, the questions around work and dignity certainly intersect with all of this, as you mentioned, Hector, too. So thank you, everybody. As we move to conclude, I just want to say a heartfelt thank you to everyone who joined us today from every corner of the world, off the heels of Pentecost. And a big thanks to the interpreters and technical team who made this gathering possible behind the scenes too. Before we go, we do want to leave you with 2 simple but meaningful ways to take action starting today. Of course, if you haven't enrolled yet in Laudato Si Action platform, now's the time. We're talking about the future of Laudato Si, and we want you to be a part of it. The updated website is designed to walk with you to that future with tools and inspiration that meet you where you are. So again, visit the website, laudatosiactionplatform.org, to get started. And if you're already enrolled, we invite you to do 2 things. Upload your reflection or Laudato Si plan. Even if it's a draft, just putting your commitment into words can be a huge step. And number 2, choose one suggested action you can take in the next month. There's a long list that's provided in the dashboard, and you could choose one thing that resonates with you at this time. It doesn't have to be big, but what matters is starting and showing others that it's possible. And if today's conversation reminded you of a story, an experience, or even a question you've been carrying, we'd love to hear it. So please email us at info@laudatosiactionplatform.org or tag us on social media to see what's unfolding in your part of your world. Now, this work isn't about information, it's about transformation, and that begins with one small step taken in community. So with that in mind, my brief but simple prayer is that we keep going together. Thank you, everybody. We hope you have a wonderful day.